Well, as folks are continuing to rejoin, just want to welcome everyone to our call this morning, and really excited to be joined by Stephanie Marshall, who I was just telling Kara that we met through a mutual Peloton moms group. So Peloton has been a COVID hobby over the past 12 or so months. And so in putting together this program, had put a little note out to the universe, and was happy to connect with Stephanie, who is a Maryland alum from the MBA and Smith School. So really excited to connect with her this morning, as well as all of you all. My name is Nicole Fleischman. I am on the board of the Alumni Association here in the Northern Virginia network, and I help with the programming as it relates to our professional development committee. And again, really looking forward to connecting with Stephanie and talking about innovation today. I work in technology, and so this is a really interesting topic for me, and so I'm hoping to share this conversation with you all. We'll pass it off to Stephanie this morning. So thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Well, I am excited to be here. I am a Smith alum, as Nicole said, and it was really funny how we came to meet. But that just goes to show you the power of networking, right? If we think, I remember going back and talking to with my MBA students and whatnot, and just it is really, networking is just so critical, right? And so, it comes in all sorts of forms, just like innovation does, right? And maybe that was an innovative form of networking.
I was like, what can I lose? Nothing. I'm just going to put it out there.
Exactly. It is a great group of women, but at any rate, I thought I would start off, my background. I, went back to get my MBA, the part-time program at Smith, in the year, I guess it was 2001, right before 9/11, actually. And I did the part-time program out of the DC campus at the Ronald Reagan building, realizing that it was so convenient because I lived in DC and I looked at Maryland because it was, top 11 part-time program. And I'm like, how am I going to get to College Park? And so I ended up getting in. I have a whole nother story about that. I actually took the GMATs twice. And because I was so stressed the first time, because I literally was like, oh, I want to go to Maryland and they have this program and it's starting and I got to get my GMAT in within a month. I ended up taking it the second time without even studying and just taking it, like relaxing and not freaking out. And I went up 100 points. So relaxation is a good thing, not stressing yourself out. And then I was at CTIA, which is the Wireless Association. I ended up going to a payments company, which is sort of mid-size, trying to convince them, hey, we should do mobile payments. And this was super, super early, like before the iPhone. And then I ended up at Verizon, where I would say is really, quite an innovative company. Left there about 6 years ago. I started my own consulting company and have been really working in the innovation space since then, and have tons of stories to share. But it really does come from anywhere and everywhere. And so I'm going to share my screen, and we'll get into it, hopefully. So innovation anywhere and everywhere. When I left Verizon, I kind of dug my heels into the DC area, right? Because when working at a large national company, you talk about, like, there's all this, talk about, Silicon Valley in New York. And I was kind of digging my heels in. I had been remote. I had a virtual team. I had a team that was with me in Virginia. I had a team that was in Texas and California and New Jersey and New York, Virginia, other parts of Virginia. And so, we were remote from the start. And, I knew that was an effective way to get things done, and that it didn't just mean that you had to be in an office all the time in order to be effective. And so, I really, when I left Verizon, thought, well, DC is just an incredible place to be, right? There's so much innovation. You've got all of these government labs in colleges like Maryland and others. It's the backbone of the internet. You have all these data centers. It's where, AOL started. It's where data-driven marketing started with Capital One. And so it was around that same time that Steve Case had started with the rise of the rest, right? And so I'm like, you know what, Silicon Valley, don't ever want to be there. You know, I kept the door open, but I'm like, you know, I don't think that's where I really want to be. I do want to sort of, you know, change sort of these stereotypes and you know, barriers to, you know, to innovation, and look at some of these small cities. You know, I've been talking ironically to a lot of people in, you know, Kansas City and St. Louis. You know, Detroit has an entire, you know, ecosystem of startups, and it really does go to show you that I think there is a shift, and there was a shift even before the pandemic, but I think that it's going to accelerate, and I think that's a really good thing for a lot of people. I think for the economy, for companies, for innovation, et cetera. So today I'm just going to set the stage, kind of take us through a little walk here, going through sort of the definition of the different forms of innovation, the process itself, and then leave it open for discussion. So I'm going to start with this. So in your head, just imagine chocolate. Take a second and think of what that word means to you. Pretty sure that everybody can think of chocolate pretty quickly, so I'm going to go quick on this one. It could be a Hershey Kiss. It could be a chocolate bar. It could be ice cream. It could be a lot of different things. There's so many different types of chocolate. And this is actually from a book called The Chocolate Conversation. And it's really, its premise is more around the communication of, like, you can say, hey, I'm talking about chocolate, and you be envisioning something completely different. But I take that also when I think about innovation. When you think about innovation, it means so many different things to so many different people. And that's actually not a bad thing. But the definition of innovation is really about, you know, the introduction of something new, right? It's a new process, a new idea, a new method, a new device. It could be anything that's new. You can make the argument, though, that there are no new ideas, but I think that there are. In terms of the forms of innovation, you know, it ranges, right? So it could be, you know, when I think, you know, to my time at the core at Verizon, you know, core innovation is, it might be, you know, there's a new process, or, you know, we're, you know, creating you know, optimizing the network, or you know, filling in a dead spot or something like that, right? Their existing products. Or if you think about, you know, Apple, right? When they introduced the Mac, the next version of the Mac is innovation on its existing product. Adjacent, and this is where a lot of companies tend to focus, is sort of, what's the easiest step in terms of innovating within my business? So expanding, you know, into a new part of the company. You know, maybe it's not necessarily new to the industry, or it exists somewhere, but, you know, maybe it's, for example, you know, when Verizon launched its, you know, advanced networks, we had to really figure out what we're going to get people to care. And then obviously this was way back with, you know, feature phones before the smartphones came out, but how do you get people to start using services? It's around, okay, well, you know what, there's a whole content world out here that we can bring content onto the device and get people interested in using it. And so that's sort of adjacent, right? So it's not a far, huge, crazy step, you know, to the left or to the right from your existing business. And then there's sort of transformational, which is, I mean, just brand new, never, you know, existed before. You know, I would think back to, you know, the development of cars, right? Cars did not exist. That was a transformational transportation, right? That wasn't just, hey, let's, you know, add a new wheel to the buggy, right? You know, different, the ability to talk wirelessly, right? And to not have a wire, that's very transformational. The internet was transformational. It created all of these new ways of doing business and interacting with people. And those are really more transformational. And so it can really range, right? You know, it could be, you know, if you're thinking about innovation within your own company or your own job, your own role, it can be so many different things, right? It doesn't have to be that transformational. It can be, you know, how do I do something differently, right? How do I introduce, you know, a new way of thinking? And there's definitely exercises that you can do as a business. So from, you know, ideation, there's Idea Lab, there's, IDEO, which is, design thinking, that kind of thing, to help you kind of brainstorm and say the what if, what might we, how might we, and those types of questions to ask. But generally, innovation does follow a cycle. So, when you think about the ideation, the brainstorming, right? If you take your team and you're like, you have a problem, state what the problem is, and then think about ideas and brainstorm about those ideas, or it could be a business idea. And then, you validate that by, talking to other people. So for example, when I was launching mobile advertising, the validation, you go out and you get voice of the customer, right? So you talk to the different customers, you look at the market, you do the research, and you validate, is this idea really valid, right? Is it going to work? Maybe it's going to be hard, but what does the market say? What do the consumers say? What are the different people in the value chain? Think about it, and gather that information and synthesize it. And then once you do that, you're like, okay, this is, I think we've got something here. We've got some data, we've got some, validation. Now we're going to incubate it. And so this is where you test and learn, test and learn, test and learn, right? So you take the idea, you go back, and then you kind of go back to that validation. You're like, okay, wait, we did this. What do you think of this? And then once you have sort of your MVP, or you're kind of beyond that MVP stage, then that's acceleration. So how am I going to scale? And how am I going to really, put some momentum behind this idea or this business, to really get to the realization part, right? Where it's, it's accepted, it's integrated, it's, successful. And so that's really the cycle. You can go through that cycle so many different times in so many different ways. But those are generally the things that I would think about as I'm exploring an innovation or a new idea. And, this goes back to sort of what I was saying in terms of the rise of the rest, and in my experience in working with a lot of big organizations, and then, looking at how they work with startups, for example, through one of my consulting clients, Sprocket, who connects them, right? That's the real reason for it. But, oftentimes you have within a company, there's different areas that are focused on innovation. And sometimes, it's just one, sometimes it's different. I truly believe that in order to be a really innovative company, that you have to take not only, you can't just focus in one area. It really has to become a culture of innovation. And you need to think about, okay, well, what am I doing internally to foster innovation? Is it, am I giving my teams room to come up with ideas? Like if I'm an employee and I have an idea of how to, fix something or do something different, how does that come into play, right? So for example, with, Comcast, they have Comcast Labs, they have, Qualcomm has, created a whole internal employee competition where, people could submit ideas and, people could work as a team to create, new innovative ideas to present to the organization. And then there's sort of the external. I find that if your company is only focused internally, then you may miss something from the outside, right? I think it's really important to have an external understanding of what's going on in the market, what are the trends in the various industries that you're looking at. And that's where some companies may partner with someone like, they may create a venture arm. So corporate VC, a lot of companies are doing that. They may create like an innovation lab. They may work with, like companies like Sprocket or Techstars or others. And that's really about, how do I partner with organizations from the outside or startups from the outside? When I was at Verizon and we were looking to launch mobile advertising, and again, this is before the iPhone, which may be hard for some of you to remember, and I'm probably dating myself, but we were not going to build a mobile ad network. We just did not have the talent or the technology internally, and it was a big risk, right? It was a brand new market. It really did not exist at that point. And so we decided to partner with a startup that was already looking at the space, right? They knew that there was an opportunity here and they saw the gap in the market and they were building towards that. They had some, some traction, and that really helped us get to market faster and with a lot less risk. And that's a model that I think really works for, companies, large companies and small companies, right? There's benefit to each, right? So once we did the deal with this company, AOL bought them the next day, right? So it's an amazing kind of example, I think, of, how you work internally to explore innovation, and then you go through that build by partners scenario, and in some cases that partnering with a startup who can move faster, who maybe you do a rev share so there's less risk, is one way of approaching it. And if you're interested in innovation, I thought Jim Stengel's book, Unleashing the Innovators, is quote down here, it's a quick read, it's an easy read, but it's a good read. And so I would suggest that as sort of reading material. And this kind of goes back to my thought of, there's companies that, all right, we're checking the box on innovation. And a lot of companies do this on diversity too, right? Like, oh, there's this big trend in the market, we got to be innovative, or, oh, diversity is important, we've got to be diverse, we got to have a strategy there, and you check the box, right? And so I thought this tweet was pretty hysterical, in innovation humor, I guess, but the two things of what how to look at it. So I don't know if you're familiar with CB Insights, but they do a lot of trend research, and so if your industry is being disrupted, then there's going to be a chart on it, because there's going to be a lot of disruptors, right? New startups and things that are coming on board. And then dead but don't know it is like, all right, well, we have an accelerator, we have a lab, we have an innovation lab, great, we should be good, right? We're innovative, we're working on it, it's perfect, right? That's not the case. And so it really does come down to culture. If you think of some of the most innovative companies, it's not just, it doesn't just happen, right? It is purposeful. There has to be a purpose to it. And I think really the people are where the innovation comes from, but they've got to have the space to do that. And there has to be a process. I spent a lot of time fighting bureaucracy, especially at a large company, but there is value to process and to how things get done. And so that would be, purpose is really the leadership supporting it, communicating that support and showing and acting, living that support. People, you can't have the people who's like, well, we've never done it that way, or we don't do it that way, or, all those types of things. You have to have people who are open to change and to, to being part of that process. And then, like I said, the process, I think it's a multi-pronged, internal, external, and then obviously through the innovation process itself. And then, a way to evaluate ideas. So what is, as a company, if new ideas come into play, like how are you looking at them? What are the criteria? What's, your company's North Star, and does the innovation fit into that? Because just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. And so there also has to be a way of saying, no, we could do this, and this is really cool and innovative, but it really doesn't align with who we are and who we want to be as a company, and therefore we're not going to go after that. And so that's really just as important as the innovation itself. Amazon, obviously, very innovative company. They've managed to continue to innovate over the years of existence. They're in every one of our lives in a lot of different ways. But this goes back to sort of what I said about culture, is you have to empower others to bring that innovation to life and to take advantage of their ideas and their criteria. Their creativity as a company, and whether it's a startup or a large company like Amazon. I talked a little bit at the beginning around the trends that are happening, the rise of the rest. That I had been digging my heels on for a good 10 years or so, maybe even really since the internet boom, which was, if you're around DC in the late 90s, early 2000s, before everything crashed, there was quite a bit of startup activity, and there was an organization called Netpreneur, and there was a lot of activity. I think that is you're going to see that happening all over the country, where people are kind of coming together and creating these innovation ecosystems. So, and a lot of times that does build around startups in technology. And so, with the pandemic and people working from home or working from anywhere and connecting, I mean, gosh, I remember, there's no way, when I had my remote team at Verizon, we didn't even have video conferencing. Everything was done on the phone, and, sending docs back and forth. I can only imagine how productive we would have been if we had some of these tools, right? Like before, it was like the big thing when we got, a video conferencing system from Cisco. Was like, oh, if we reserve the conference room here in Virginia, and we reserve the conference room in Northern Virginia, in New Jersey, then we can all see each other. It was like this big, amazing thing, right? And now we can do that right here, from our laptops or even our phones. And it is quite amazing. And thank goodness we had this during the pandemic, because I really think that it's helped us all continue to be productive. And innovate, right? And so, you look at the trends here. There's so many articles. If you just, if you're just even slightly paying attention to it, you're going to see them. But this is one from GeekWire that talks about, the exodus from different, innovation hubs. So like New York, Silicon Valley, right? There's folks that are going to Austin or to, or wherever. And, there's another one where it says, a lot of folks went to Miami. So is Miami going to be the next, Silicon Valley? I don't really know, but I think the key is that, it's changing the way that people were thinking, right? I remember when I was at Verizon and sort of got put on a new team, and he's like, well, where are you? My new boss from New Jersey was like, well, where are you? Why aren't you in my office? And I'm like, oh, I'm out of Virginia. And he's like, what? Like, how can you do that? That doesn't happen. And I was like, and he was like, well, normally I would throw up on that, but so I was able to prove myself and say, guess what? We're a very productive team, and we don't have to be in the corporate office in New Jersey to do that. And so, I think for folks that, this is not, that was a foreign concept to them. Now it's something that, wow, okay. Can you imagine? Like there's all sorts of, data out there that shows that productivity has gone up substantially. And I'm like, can you imagine what it would be like if we didn't have to, take care of our kids on virtual school, or the fact that there maybe wasn't a pandemic going on and we're not worried about, family members or ourselves dying. That might be a pretty good gain in productivity, and maybe less in burnout. And so, I think that not only from a working, future of work perspective, but, where work happens, where innovation happens, is going to shift. And so really that's it.
Thanks, Stephanie. So I was taking copious notes, as I usually do. And so I wanted to circle back on one of the things you had mentioned early on, and you mentioned, the barriers to innovation, right? And so in preparing for this conversation, had asked some folks for their questions around innovation. And one of the things that I got was, how do you promote innovation in the workplace? And I think, to some extent you did address it in some of your slides, in that, you can do exercises in the idea labs or the innovation labs, but maybe more, tactically, what have you seen in, just kind of recent months, how folks can, innovate within their home or within their existing teams?
Yeah, so I think, if I, I'm thinking like there's tools that you can use virtually, but again, I think it really just starts with the culture, right? So if you're a leader in the organization, you want to create innovation, you have to set that culture. But you can also do that from the bottom up, not just the top down, right? And so when you see an opportunity, you have to be tenacious, and you have to, I think, have the data to support, right? If you know that here's a really great idea, and I know that this is going to help the company, and you can take that to your manager or your, and help get them on board. And that's where it takes that persuasion, and that, you're passionate about it, and saying, okay, well, here's why, and here's the data. Like if you go through that innovation process, you can do that on your own. You don't need your company to to bless that per se. I mean, you can, you know, go talk to customers, go look at the research and say, look, like this is happening. And I think that there's an opportunity for us to hear, and here's what I think that opportunity is. And if your company has a culture of innovation, or even if it doesn't, then they're going to at least look at it, right? And if they don't, then maybe that isn't a place you really want to be, because if you're an innovative person and you're not being allowed to bring your talents and your ideas into play, then that could be pretty miserable in terms of environment. But you know, I think that from, you know, going back to, you know, the ideation and some of those things, you can do that with a small group of team members. You know, it doesn't have to be an industry or an organization-wide thing, right? If you're a leader, you can get your own team together and take them through some of these exercises. I mean, you know, you don't have to have like formal training in these things. You know, there's books, there's articles, I'm sure there's tons of videos on the internet about how to really get someone through, you know, to come out of their, you know, their lane and to start thinking a little differently. And even if you did it, I mean, even just a short little workshop of, you know, you know, come up with like an ideation session. You can do that on, you know, there's Jamboard that I think Google has, but there's another one called Bluescape. There's all these different, like, you know, normally in person, you know, take a bunch of Post-its and like you ask a question, you give people 3 minutes and they write down all their ideas really quickly. And then you start to organize the ideas and then rank the ideas and then figure out, okay, well, here's, you know, 3 that are really, we think as a team are viable. And then you go explore and go do that, you know, validation. But you can do that online. You can do it in a Google Doc, right? You know, everybody throw their ideas in at the same time, or, you know, there's ways to do it virtually. I mean, I do think, you know, virtual is not everything, right? I love a lot of aspects of it, but there's also, you know, importance of being face-to-face every once in a while. And sometimes for innovation that's helpful, but it still works, you know, regardless of whether I'm sitting next to you or I'm looking at the screen.
We've got a little competition at our organization right now, so I'm gonna see how, you know, that goes over the next couple of weeks here. I think we're managing it via Teams. We have like a kind of like a suggestion box right now that we're gonna socialize and kind of like vote on, or have folks you know, provide input on in our next team meeting. So we'll keep.
That's a perfect example, right? There's so many different ways you can, you know, and I think it's important to collect ideas and to encourage ideas. I think the second piece is that what are you going to, like, once you do that, what are you going to do next? Right? Because if you get people excited about, oh, I'm going to submit my idea and we're going to do these things, you know, that's where, you know, going back to that, the process of how do you evaluate them and how do you decide what moves forward? Because if that's not clear and communicated, and, you know, people are giving their ideas and they're encouraged to do that, it could backfire if nothing happens, right? Or nothing is communicated and it goes into a black hole and it's like, oh, this was a great fun exercise, but I'm not going to do this again because I just spent all this time on this and, you know, made myself vulnerable in some ways and, you know, put it out there. So I think, you know, you've got to have the follow-up and the backup, because otherwise that just hurts the culture.
And I also, and Katie, Judy, Jill, feel free to chime in. But I did like the forms of innovation where you had the range of innovation, right? And so I think coming into the meeting, I was like, wow, innovation, it's gotta be something new, like completely new, doesn't exist in the market. And then, you know, as I'm looking at that slide, some of it's just, how can we do something better, more, right? And so I'm a consultant, so that's always my mindset, but I guess I never really thought about it as innovation, but just, how can we do it better? But glad to see it on the spectrum of, you know, the forms of innovation.
Well, and I thought there's no chat here, or at least I can't find it. but there's resources. I'll just list them. There's that actually came from a Harvard Business Review article. It's called Managing Your Innovation Portfolio, and it's from 2012. So it's not, there could be more updated information, but it's really, those are the forms, and it'll go through the cycle and things like that. And different people have opinions on the different types of process, and so there's so many different ways of doing it. And there's lots of corporate innovation type things. Another reason that's outside of the Unleashing the Innovators, which I mentioned before, there's Lean Startup by Reese, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And then oh my gosh, it's still early. Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen. If you were in business school, I'm sure you've read the books, but those are also really good references from an innovation at a more, in a way, academic level. The Lean Startup is very helpful. Like if you want to think about sort of the that next step and like the validation, right? They have the business canvas, the startup canvas that helps you kind of think through the idea and say, is this, what do we need to win? What do we need to do? And, does this really is this something we should spend time on? And it's a great way of thinking through things versus, writing an 80-page business plan, which is never fun. And maybe it's fun.
One of the books I recently read was The 0 to 1 by, I can't remember, but it's more on the big innovation and creating something new.
Yeah.
So
That's, I feel like I love just absorbing information, one from the books, two just even from in the market, right? Like, following the Wall Street Journal, or I love Axios, TechCrunch. From a technology perspective, you'll start to pick up on trends, future of work. There's a lot of stuff in fintech. There's a lot of stuff in commerce. Look at what startups are getting funded. That's a whole another conversation around women and people of color getting funded at very, very low levels. But that's another conversation. But you can see all right, what are the trends? Where, who's getting, what are some of these really crazy big ideas out there? Space tech is another one that's, I think, popping up, med tech, femtech. There's a lot of really hot areas. Sports betting, because of legislative changes. I personally love the wearables space, but there's a lot of really interesting, innovations anywhere you look, right? I help run an angel group in DC called Citrine Angels. So we see a lot of new startups. We're women investing in women, and you would be amazed at the number of ice cream companies that are startups. I had no idea, right? One, I learned all about the ice cream industry and the fact that you have to get them into a co-packer and so many different new things. But even ice cream can be innovated.
What was the name of that? Citrine Angels, what did you say?
Citrine Angels. So the gem. Yeah, we're DC. We've invested in companies outside of the DC area, but it's a great group of women that are really trying to change one, we think that our thesis is that if we can get more women writing checks and investing in early stage companies, then more women-led companies will get a chance to succeed. And therefore that will change the ridiculously low, less than 2% number of companies that, or not of companies, of amount of funding that goes to women and people of color.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, about the culture and mindset being the most difficult. Because
Yes.
I'm a consultant in the Homeland Security space. And on our project, we're trying to promote innovation. And, we're setting aside time like every 2 weeks to meet and talk about what's important in the mission and how we can, new ways we can accomplish the mission. Like we're looking at, using different data to track, for example, like transnational criminal organizations. So it's been difficult. We're carving out time, but people oftentimes they're busy, they can't come, and we need those, data scientists to be in those discussions.
Yes.
We as business analysts help drive those conversations, kind of extract the information. We also use the Microsoft Planner. We're starting exploring, looking at like, kind of like the digital Post-its, right? These are the ideas and, what are the constraints and what do we need and how to move forward, like, how to rank different ideas. But it's been difficult with the culture.
Yeah, that's definitely tough from the, and that's where I think you kind of it has to be attacked at all different angles. And if there's an organization that I mentored with called FedTech, and basically they worked with, I think they are doing something with Homeland Security, but they did a lot with the Department of Defense and NISN. And they're, and again, this is more external innovation, but they work with the different labs to commercialize the technology, and they bring in entrepreneurs that are interested in commercializing that tech. And they have a whole program that they bring people through. And, I don't know if you can do it if you're a government employee, but it's a really amazing, like there's opportunity to be a mentor. There's, they do events and things like that, but that might be something to explore. And the other thing I would recommend is, looking at things like that. So like if you're in an area that you really want to push innovation, find other people in the nation that are also interested in doing that, or other programs, right? So Homeland Security is massive, right? So are there, is there, labs that are happening, or are there partnerships that happen with Homeland Security where you can kind of find your tribe, right? Like people who like, gosh, I know this is like banging your head against the wall, right? And so, that kind of gives you a little bit of energy to keep going, even though it's hard. Because eventually, hopefully it will work, right? I mean, that's so, like, there's a lot of, I would say there's also a lot of I'm seeing more attention on innovation within the government. And so that kind of gives me hope in terms of it not being so, it's hard. It's like, it's super bureaucratic, right? I think of like, oh gosh, I thought Verizon was bureaucratic, right? And slow and, but there's the organizations and the services that are popping up around the government to help them innovate, I think is encouraging. I think, I'm trying to think back to your question too, though, is like, how do you get them to focus, right? And how do you, and again, that is like, you have to find those champions. So maybe there's certain data scientists that are self-selecting to be part of it, and even if they don't, maybe it is like, okay, look, I only need an hour of your time, right? Like here, like help me think through this problem and how we might solve it. Doing something.
That's literally 1 hour of every 2 weeks. We're starting with
half an hour, right?
Yeah, we're starting with our program right now. But some of those people, like they do have contact with other parts of the government. So, and we're pitching this idea to the government. We're consultant team. So even the consultants themselves, like some of them, the data scientists, they're very focused on the day-to-day work. So it's been a little difficult to try to get them, to be in a room and just have that 1 hour discussion.
Yeah, and
it's something. Give us some ideas so we can, take it to do more research in it. But we definitely need their technical expertise, to look into what works, what doesn't work, and
and maybe take a step back of like, forget about the constraints that you currently have, right? So like, instead of having to use them, like what are the problems that you're trying to solve? or what problems do you think data, like, and I don't know the context, but like if it's really around data, then what are the data sources, or what are, think, maybe take yourself out of like what's currently happening and what you need them to do, and come up with, like, if you could do anything, what would it be? And then kind of go into, okay, is it possible, right? Because anything's possible with money, time, resources, etc., right? But if you can kind of take the constraints away of having to have them there, you could do some work outside and then come back to them with, hey, we have this idea, or could we, or might we do this, right? And if and then they can say, well, we can't do this because of X, Y, and Z, and then you can go, okay, well, what if we fixed X, Y, and Z, right? And then you just chip away at it.
Yeah, we look at the mission, like what are the current needs right now, or kind of projecting what are going to be the trend, what would be the biggest risk, and tackle from there.
Yeah, and there's so many, oh my gosh, there's so many companies that are popping up from an AI perspective and data analytics, especially in the government space.
I think they're slowly coming around, slowly.
Yeah, it is slow, and it always feels so much slower,
And it's so frustrating.
Oh
like,
gosh,
even within our own team, it's kind of hard to get this going. And then once we have a little something, we talk with our government client and pitch those ideas, and they're like, "Oh, nice, but let me think about it and see, talk about resources and all that." I'm like, "This is hard. This is, the migrant problem or whatever. Like, we have this idea, we can make this work. You don't have to go the traditional way. Like, there are all kinds of data out there. You can use different things to track people down, track crime organizations down." We're starting some of those conversations. But mindset and culture, that's definitely big.
Yeah, and then you just I would look at I don't know, maybe there's ways to bring in examples of where it's worked in other industries, or like impact on other industries. It doesn't have to be like exactly the same data or exactly the same problem, but you can say, here's how data was used in this way, and it saved X amount, or it saved X amount of lives, or using those adjacent examples.
I was wondering, I noticed in your presentation you included GeekWire and PitchBook. I'm just curious, what other industry publications do you suggest keeping up with in this space, just to kind of see how the industry is?
Yeah, I mean, like, I subscribe to way too many things, but there's, MIT has, a newsletter, so does Harvard. That's more on sort of obviously the academic, but you'll start to see trends there. TechCrunch is great. I would say, Wall Street Journal, you start to see, their tech stuff, CMO, I do CIO, CMO. I'm trying to think of some other ones. I can just look at my email because I'm sure I have like 6,000 of them. I definitely love TechCrunch. I think, let's see, there's a lot of innovative type. I guess I get my information from a lot of different places. I am part of like join industry organizations for your industry. So I get, the CTIA news, I get, some stuff on fintech, like in the areas. In DC, there's Technically, which is technical.ly. There's DC Inno, like DC Innovation. I think it's, Washington Business Journal, like spinoff. Those are for like more local. And then I'm also part of a lot of, tech groups. So there's like even like Facebook groups, like Women in Tech. There's Tech World's Half. There is Women Founders Unite. And obviously I'm in a lot of gendered ones, but there's also, other, everyone kind of groups too. But that's how I get a lot of my information, and just talking to people and networking. LinkedIn has a bunch of, I follow a bunch of people. I've built my network on there, and you can kind of see what other people are posting. That kind of keeps me in the loop on different things. So those are, and I would look at IDEO as well.
Are you spelling just IDEO?
IDEO, yeah. Let me just make sure. And there's also like, I think frog design, like there's, but the design thinking is a good one to kind of look at.
Thank you.
There's even like, it was funny, I was looking at, MIT has a class that you can take on it. So if your organization is interested in, I'm sure Maryland has one, but there might be things that you can audit that or take, if your company's interested in paying for it or not.
Great, thank you.
Well, and I'm happy to answer questions offline too.
Wonderful. Love to share out your contact information, and happy to share my contact information as well for folks who are attending.
Yep, it's and feel free to look me up on LinkedIn, Stephanie Bauer Marshall, B-A-U-R Marshall. But I'm not giving up my last name. I'll take yours, but I'm not married.
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, and thanks, Judy and Katie, Kara and Jill. Thank you so much for joining us this morning and for the conversation. Again, if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to Stephanie or myself directly, and can share out our contact information. And I think as we think through programming for the future, it doesn't have to necessarily be women in technology related. That was just a passion, interest of mine. If you have any other connections or topics that you are interested in hearing in the future as we continue to build our programming, would love to hear that as well.
And maybe one day we'll see each other in person again.
Yeah, I know. Really looking forward to that. We were in such a good groove of having the in-person meetings, and then obviously everything had shut down a little bit, but we are looking forward to in-person programming eventually. Yeah. But in the meantime,
virtual's just, someone could,
it's
like, I want to go somewhere at like 7 in the morning to have an 8 o'clock meeting.
Exactly.
Traffic, there's pros and cons.
Definitely has its advantages.
Yep.
Well,
thanks,
thank you
Nicole.
so much,
Yeah, thanks, Nicole.
Of course.
Thanks, Stephanie. Have a great day, everyone. And go Terps.
Bye, everyone. Stay well.